Hello, my name is Martin Walsh. I am conducting the final assignment for Module 8 on the research and evidence based practice. Today we're going to be doing a brief 10 to 15-minute TED Talk style presentation on our clinical research problem, what data we've uncovered, and potential solutions, ethical considerations, how we can implement uh, this in our own practice, how we can evaluate that implementation, so on. So to begin, uh, our clinical problem is how does a higher nurse to patient ratio, so a larger number of patients per nurse, affect nursing burnout? And I should emphasize that a great deal of the research that was put into this stuff occurred in the last, you know, 10 to 15 years, and then all the research that I did was research on that. Meaning, a large majority of the research is kind of omitting a massively important event in our last 5 years of nursing history that has completely changed what burnout and job dissatisfaction, fatigue, stuff like that, what that even looks like. And there are more data points these days than ever before because you have to look at stuff like what units you're on and your patient population and the location, because you could have a ICU nurse that never took care of or rarely took care of COVID patients if they were in like a neural ICU. But then you could also have an ICU nurse who dealt with death every single day nonstop, and that can completely change the game. So, all right, let's move on from that. So, obviously, as a new grad or even a floor level RN, or even like you just a basic unit charge, instituting a change in policy that could potentially affect this is not in our scope. We are talking DONs of departments or the whole hospital. But if I could explain or implement this procedure, um, well, let me back up real quick. I'm just going to go briefly over the research that I've highlighted over the last few days. Um, our all of the research shows that high nurse to patient ratios produce tons of negative outcomes. You have increased odds of nurse injuries, such as you have 3 times more likely to have a needle stick injury. You are more likely to make medication errors. You are more likely to um, see a lot more HAIs or healthcare associated infections um, on units that are chronically understaffed. The job dissatisfaction and retention rates are going to be extraordinarily low, and this is so much more costly for hospitals than it is to actually staff them correctly. You see these things in the news where like hospitals are starting to require a mandatory employment rank length. Like the most recent one, I think it was in California, charging nurses $15,000 if they left early because that was the cost of training them. But rather than paying another nurse to assist, you have to pay two or three or four. You have to put in that amount of training as you're burning through them that fast. You are, the average cost of an HAI is, I think it's roughly $36,000, and that's just for the simple surgical site infection. It goes up, or I mean, correction, a UTI is the cheapest one, and it goes up from there to an incredible amount of money. Um, obviously needle stick injuries. You know, fingers crossed, nothing happens. You still have to have that nurse on prophylactic medication, and monthly to quarterly to biannual uh, assessments. So it's very costly. Now, my research showed that I wanted to develop a system to you know support nurses on that floor, and that starts by increasing nurses to lower the ratio. So, being that, like I just said, a unit level nurse cannot make staffing decisions. This will be as if I was a department head or even the DON of a hospital presenting this to the board. I would start by just taking a year over year analysis for like the last 2 to 3 years of series of data points that can point to issues arising from nurse burnout. And one of those things that I'll be showing you is like this will also include the prompt where it says sources of internal evidence. So for those internal data points that I will use to highlight the need for and yes, how I'll sell it to the board will be obviously nurse retention rates and the cost of retraining nurses when they leave. So that can be joined as one. If you have nurses leaving every 8 months, it costs this amount of money over the last 3 years. Job related injuries, such as everything from like needle sticks to lumbar strains, trip and falls, and even physical assaults. Because in units that are chronically understaffed, patients can become agitated and lash out. And when there's nobody else around, I think it kind of lends, you know, a little bit more encouragement to those patients likely to lash out. HAI rates, and then obviously needle stick injuries, as I mentioned, and then a I will be proposing a 6 month and a 1 year reassessment through those same type of controlled study groups that all the other researchers had used that assess stuff like job satisfaction, intent or desire to want to leave, etc. When we are talking about the theoretical model that we're going to use, uh, especially when we're overcoming our barriers to implementation, one of the ones I like is Kristen M. Swanson's theory of caring, which states that caring is a nurturing way of relating to a value other. And I apologize for that messing up her direct quote. I want to summarize. It's caring's a nurturing way of relating to a patient and putting your own personal sense of commitment and responsibility into them. And it's defines nursing kind of as an informed caring for the well-being of others. Now, this theory offers a structure for improving up-to-date nursing practice and education while bringing the discipline to its traditional values. And I think that describes the problem on med-surg better than anything. You have patients, 6, 7, or 8 patients that you're supposed to see constantly, and nobody can get that good, effective personal care from your nurse when they're doing it 9 times an hour. And I think by increasing staffing, I I can tell you from my experience that being in the hospital for days on end and seeing somebody once every 2 to 3 hours when it was time for my next IV or next medication. It drove me nuts. You're locked in a room by yourself, and this silence can be deafening. And that did not aid my healing at all. So by removing a lot of the restraints that we put on nurses, like, I mean, time restraints, like having to chart and medicate 9 patients. If we could shrink that down, then they can actually go in there and talk to their patients and provide that healing care that we are trained to do, but we just don't get to anymore. When it comes to the ethical considerations, there's only one big glaring one that I know, and something that the American Journal of Nurses, and they talk about this a lot. There's been study after study that shows the long-term cost savings of increasing your staff nurses compared to adverse events, needle sticks, and burnouts, and nobody cares. There's not a single hospital group that says, you know what, you're right, let's double our nurses. They just don't want to see that money go out of their pocket, even if it does save them long run. And the biggest ethical consideration in my mind is what happens when this data that we seek out through our own, implementation works, and they don't implement it across the hospital. So when we go ahead and conduct this change project as the DON, I would identify the floors that need it the most, and I would probably start with a med surg floor, specifically because, in order to pull in a lot more nurses, we're gonna have to likely pull from the new grad groups and other nurses that are not exactly the very high demand ones. So doubling up a 24-bed ICU like staff would be much more difficult than a med surg floor. Then I would obviously, the things that I had mentioned, make a data set of the last 3 years so you can see their trends, and then you would want a forward progression data set. So I would do a 6-month and a 1-year reassessment, and at 6 months, if I'm seeing very positive results, I would attempt to persuade the board to allow me to implement this change on a larger scale. Say go to to another med surg floor, or a tele, or a CCU, or a PCU, and implement changes there as well. So that way, at the end of the year, you could see this, like the overall changes, the outcomes from that project change we were just talking about. I would see more than likely the nurse retention rates will rise, which means subsequently the nurse training cost will decrease because you're no longer training a new nurse every 4 months. The job related injury rates will decrease, so the costs associated with those will go down. HAI rates and other issues like medication errors, slip and falls, eloping patients, those will all decrease because we'll have more staff. And also, as I mentioned, assaults, those should go down too. Just you have a greater presence, and it's a sense of security thing. And the 6-month and 1-year assessment studies will show improved job satisfaction. Now, to disseminate those, I would put them all into a comprehensive report, much like we see in any of these other ones. And something I really like in these reports, charts. I want to see hard data, actual numbers. Then I'll see, because you can quantify an HAI as 1, you know. So it's very easy to see the difference. But then I can see percentage, or I should say, change, percent change from year to year. And then at the end, I would do a line graph. I would do like a little box first with an arrow, either sloping up or sloping down as the perceived direction that we would think and want it to go, and then the actual line graph showing the 3 years prior, the 6 month point, and then the 1 year point. And when you put that together, you can, that is like the hard data that you'll know. And then to really sell home the findings, you can estimate things like costs associated with HAIs, or costs associated with trainings, or needle stick injuries, or medication errors, and then we could extrapolate upon our findings just how much money was saved per floor in that first year, and it will almost guaranteed it'll be able to offset the cost of those nurses. Because if you say this is how much we spent X on nurses, but we saved Y, it's in black and white, and that's the best way to really disseminate the findings and encourage the hospital system to adapt it, site wide. So that was my research. Thank you very much.